is for the Water and Sewer Center Replacement Fund. And this is to replace the building out at the water and sewer site. Our unassigned fund balance and net position. Unassigned fund balance is a measure of how much liquid assets we have. We use the unassigned fund balance in our funds that use modified accrual accounting. And it's close to what we would call cash and accounts receivable. What we anticipate is what we would be able to raise in the year and 2 months after the year. We have 60 days to post revenue from the prior year. So for example, sales taxes don't come in until February, but they are booked to the prior year. The net position are our accrual funds. The water and sewer fund and our parking fund are what we call enterprise funds. As you know, these are the two funds that the fees that we charge our users fund all of the expenditures that we have in those funds. In this year's recommended budget, we are recommending $192.4 million in the general fund in revenues and $192.7 million in expenditures. That is recommending a slight use of $300,000 of fund balance. The water fund, conversely, we have revenues about $58.1 million, expenditures of $56.9 million. We anticipate increasing our net position about $1.2 million. But I will point out that goes to funding capital expenditures, and in this budget, we are recommending $17.5 million in capital expenditures in the water and sewer fund. In the parking fund, we have revenues of $4.97 million. That takes into account the increases in the parking fees that we did at the last council meeting. About $5.04 million in expenditures. And as of when we printed the budget, we were going to use about $72,000 of net position. However, since we printed the budget, the state has repealed the tax on parking. So in our budget, we have $111,647 in taxes, and that was repealed by the state. So we will anticipate adding about $40,000 to this fund, which is much needed. Included in this fund is a bond recommendation of $3 million. So we would borrow money on the open market and do infrastructure improvements, mainly on our parking decks, but in other areas in our parking system also.
Jim, can I ask a question?
Yes.
We just talked about this last week, Steve. You wanted to hire an engineer. You said a consultant. Why would we bond $3 million if we don't have the figure of what we're going to need yet?
The bonding comes after the engineer comes up with the cost estimates.
Right, so why are we budgeting to bond for $3 million? We don't know what it's going to cost.
It was an estimate that was put in. We had a $2 million estimate 5 years ago from the, I can't think of, Walker Parking Systems. They analyzed about $1 million in each deck. So we're assuming there'd be inflation, and technology was not part of that. So these are some real rough estimates. If it's in higher or lower, obviously we'll have to make that adjustment.
Okay, and then to follow up, because I know we had this exchange last week, you said you've made the decision not to pursue selling the one deck, even though we have a buyer. That was your decision? You made that?
Well, you asked the question, and I said it's my recommendation that the city not sell assets, and I think I used the Chicago parking example as one of the reasons. You don't sell your assets and then expect that somehow you still have control.
Well, you sell them if you can't afford them. And if we have to bond the $3 million to fix it, I think it's a council decision. We should consider whether we want to sell it or not. And I don't know what my opinion would be, but I don't think it should be made by you individually. I think the 9 of us, and probably starting a committee, need to make that decision, take an intelligent look at what the pros and cons are of moving in that direction.
And that's certainly something council can do, because obviously you would have to approve the bonds. But as I said, you lose control, and there are also, very likely that some of the parking that is now being paid parking in that particular deck associated with the individual, that becomes free parking, which then decreases the revenues with the entire system.
Which is a con, and it's a valid argument. I know previous city managers talked about privatizing the entire system.
Right.
So those are policy decisions that need to be made. And I would recommend before we spend $3 million, or even hire an engineer, that's a decision council needs to make what direction we're gonna move in on that.
Yeah, as I said, that certainly, council approves the bonds, so that's certainly something you could decide to do. If you'd like to do hire somebody to do a feasibility study in terms of the economics of losing one of those decks, both on the expense side as well as the loss of revenue, certainly that's something we could do before there's any proposal for bonds.
What committee would this start at? Is this public service, public safety?
Either that or
Public
finance.
service or finance? Who wants to tackle it? Mike?
Well, sure, I don't care.
Maybe have the finance committee take a look at this and make recommendations?
We'll place that on for discussion at the next finance agenda. That's December 19th.
Thank you.
Just to briefly go what is in this budget, our general fund supports the police and fire, economic development, engineering, code enforcement, garbage collection, legal services, financial services, and general administration. The water fund provides for operation of our water system, which includes 3 wastewater treatment plants, 571 miles of combined and separate sanitary sewer, 26 wells, 11 water treatment plants, 663 miles of water main, 8,351 fire hydrants, and 31 lift stations. Quite a large system. The parking fund supports operations of the 2 parking decks, 7 parking lots, 412 on-street meters, 19 on-street pay station, and 700 on-street parking spaces. Briefly, this is the 3 operating funds. We are recommending a 4.5% increase for the general fund, a 2.53 increase in the water fund, and a 172% increase in the parking fund. However, 3 million of that is the aforementioned bond. So really, that would be almost a balanced budget without the infrastructure improvements at the parking fund. Briefly go over the general fund. These are the highlights. A little later on, we will go into each department. Some of them are repeated. 192 million in estimated revenues, increase of 7.7 million or 4% over the 2019 budget. A recommended 4.9% increase in property tax. However, this property tax will not raise the tax rate, as most of it will be taken up by new construction and growth. We've gotten our preliminary assessed values from the county, and it looks like the value of our property in the city is going to go up almost 9%, 8.77%. The levy for the library operations is requested to be the same as it has in the last couple of years. There is a recommendation to bond $6.5 million for infrastructure upgrades, as the head librarian has pointed out to you. It is estimated that will cost about $8 per year per household.
Jim, if I could stop you again for a second. Steve, when this was presented at the City Center Partnership, there was talk about other entities joining in. How much are we getting, or is the county or other organizations?
There was no one that came forward to us. I would ask the library to indicate if there was some other funding source in addition.
No, there's not. One of the reasons is that Will County has 19 different public libraries within Will County. And so Will County could be asked if and when the city council decides not to fund this project, but for the cost of $8 a year per household, this was the legal and first best route for us to do this way.
There also was talk of a capital program or capital, to try to raise money. Has that been?
It's planned for the spring, but again, it would never raise the kind of money that we're looking at for the city's power to bond the money for us.
Thank you.
I have a question for, I'm sorry, Megan? You already have $4 million. So if the 6 million weren't to pass this year, could you not start your projects with the 4 million? Look what your capital fundraising would do, and then maybe come next year for the rest of it?
The problem comes with going out to bid for contractors. Without the full funding being secured by city council, they will not offer a bid for the full price of the project. And the cost escalation in that case would be so much more. It would cost the library in the city quite a bit more to do it in two pieces that way. I think my architect could maybe speak to that better than I can about those details, but I feel it would, I think from what I've understood is that it would cost quite a bit more to do that, and we couldn't even get a contractor to bid on the project. So, Joe or Sean, do you want to?
When we go out for public bid, the amount that the contractor is bidding for typically needs to be proven. You have to prove that you can afford what you're asking for them to bid on.
No, I understand that. What
Okay.
I'm saying, aren't there other smaller things you could start on first before you go for the whole picture, for the whole place?
Yeah, we could break the project up into different phases and proceed that way. We did look at different ways to break that up. The escalation is somewhere around 4% a year. And that would just add to the complexity. Also, to remobilize and rebid each individual project does raise the cost. So our goal was to try to bring this in as quickly as possible to keep the overall investment as low as possible.
And I understand that, and I don't know how this council is going to vote on it, but I'm just thinking, we're already looking at $8 per household per year. And there's a lot of other things that are going to be raised in this budget. I haven't seen exactly item by item yet what it's going to be. But it could be an individual household with all these expenditures, with the water coming too. It could be quite a bit of money for somebody, you know, when those start adding up, $8 here, $10 there. I'm just trying to look at the whole picture.
Okay.
You understand what I'm talking about? No, do you? Never mind. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I can kind of respond to the cost of $8 per household is for the cost of an average house in all of Joliet. I have broken out for you every district's different prices. The prices can be as low as $3 per household in certain areas of Joliet. So the more that a family can afford, the more it costs, and the less they can afford, the less impact it will be on them. We understand we don't want to impact people too greatly either, but for the cost, for what they are going to get, and for the families who really need a place to bring their children, and to for our literacy to raise in Joliet, which District 86 has identified as a crisis, I think it's worth the revenue, and it's worth doing it all at once in one fell swoop because it's the most cost efficient, and because I would not want to piecemeal a project such as this, get halfway finished, and then the will of council changes in a year or two, and then we'd never be able to finish the project, and a half-done project would be something less than.
Well, the reason I asked the question is because a lot of my constituents have been asking that because they saw the presentation that you brought before us before about the 6 million, and they, well, if you already have the 4 million, can't you? Isn't there something you can start and then wait to get the 6 million? That's why I asked the question.
I can do that. I prefer not to, and I ask you to vote for the
Well,
6.5.
everybody would prefer
Thank you.
not to. And thank you, Megan, for your presentation.
In the general fund, a lot of new positions were requested. In the city manager's recommended budget, there are 4 new positions recommended. A permit clerk, a building safety inspector, and a planning assistant from part-time to full-time would be in the community development department. This would be matched by increase in fees to cover the cost of this. The goal is to make the permit process a lot faster than it is currently. And in the legal budget, a request for an assistant corporate counsel was made. This is accompanied by a reduction in the contractual services. This assistant corporate counsel would mainly be doing prosecutions. In this budget includes increases for pensions. The police pension increase was $1.3 million. The fire increase in the pension was $1 million, and the IMRF increase in pension was $522,000. All this is incorporated into this budget.
Steve, I got a question about that. This is a little perspective, but I know there's firemen here. With the bill that just passed in Springfield, how, and maybe you guys can answer if you want to step up. There's guarantees that local money is going to be commingled with money from throughout the state. And there's a guarantee that the local money is always coming back to Joliet. It's being done for investment purposes only. Is that accurate? Is that your understanding? Now, I know, I mean, yeah, just in conversations I've had with different elected officials or bits that are coming from the news, that there is talk about certain jurisdictions generalizing their pension obligations and making them county-wide or statewide. So that's on the agenda, on some people's agenda. How confident are you guys that that's never gonna happen with this money? 5 years from now, they're not gonna come back and say, this city can't make their obligation, so we're gonna take from the fund. And in essence, Joliet's gonna be funding other cities' pensions.
That can't happen.
Have them come forward.
Yeah.
From the law, and the fund is gonna be run just like IMRF. You don't see Joliet money going to Crest Hill when they're running the fund loan. It's the tendency, and that's the best way to explain it. We're trying to make the pension funds run like IMRF,
Have them come
which
in, Mike.
is run very well.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
You wanna come forward?
No, it's gonna happen. That's what I was told.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, Steve, maybe you or Jim can answer. Again, that's what's being said today. We don't have any guarantees on this. And I haven't talked to the unions offline, so I don't know what your feelings were, but I think it would be a concern of mine if I were paying into it, that what's being proposed today is gonna change sometime down the road.
Okay, the way I understood it, it is, get your foot in the door, it is to invest as a whole, but then I was also told that down the line, the smaller municipalities, I said this the other night, I believe, the smaller municipalities that can't afford their pensions, they're gonna be borrowing from that so that they can help fill those out. You're shaking your head no, but that's what I wanna see, no, but I want a guarantee, but there are no guarantees, because that's not what I was told.
Here it is. It's
Can you come to the mic, please, so we can all hear?
It's not my legislation. It's come through the state.
No, I know.
And it's gonna work very well from what, the IMRF, I think everybody here can agree, IMRF runs very well. And what they're trying to do is model it after IMRF. Everybody puts Joliet will have a piece of the pie, Bolingbrook has a piece of the pie, we all have a piece of the pie. Bolingbrook doesn't get a piece of our pie. Nobody gets a piece of our pie. Joliet is still required, they will be required to put into the pie.
But they're all coming together for the investment purpose.
For the investment, we're gonna save investment purposes. Joliet right now has, on the fire side, we have 8 different investment people. On the police side, I'm not too sure what they have. But each of those 8 investment people take a little bit of the cream off the top. They're trying to save money in that manner. Right now, it's all gonna go in just like IMRF invest the money. IMRF, they pull, I don't know how many investment people they have, not very many, but they bid it out. It's structured the same thing, bonds, fixed income, everything. It's gonna run pretty well. And that's what the whole intent is to make this thing work like IMRF, because
That's what I
what's
hope. We have the
IMRF is funded at
strongest pension funds for you
109%
guys,
this year.
right.
We'd like to be funded at 109%. I think everybody in this room would be. It would make things a lot easier.
Well, that was my concern.
Yep, no, and I wouldn't have any concerns. I think it's a good law.
Mayor?
Yes.
I've looked over the legislation, Eric, and you're right. The way it is set up right now, and of course, we can't predict who changes what in 10 years, right? But right now, it's proportionate, right? It's mainly taking economy of scales and taking a bunch of medium, small, maybe a couple of large investment funds and putting them together in one, but then the additional investment revenue that's generated will be then put back proportionately to what you put in. So if Joliet's got 100 million in there, and every 100 million gets an additional 13 million because of the economy of scales that year, 13 million comes back to Joliet. Does that pretty much summarize it?
Yeah, whatever they make, it just gets cut up and put back into your pocket.
It's all proportional.
Yes, exactly. Any other?
If you're good with it, I'm good with it.
Thank you.
I think, Councilman, the main thing is down the road, is everybody, you know, from the firemen to the
Right.
elected officials, don't let it change from the IMRF model.
Well,
And
that
I
was
know
the
you guys are
original.
gonna keep an eye on that.
That was the original time they changed. it.
Right.
We're good.
Few of the operational items that are in this budget, there's $250,000 for a continued citywide comprehensive plan. That was budgeted this year, but it wasn't complete, so the remainder is budgeted for next year. The completion of the county courthouse parking lot, many of you will know that's the parking lot right across the street from the old Union Station, which is now Migraine Brewery. We started that, but it's going to take around 300 more to finish it. And continued support of the Historical Museum at $275,000. We are committed for the Will County Courthouse for the next 19 years for $500,000, and the Rialto Theater at $475,000, which is a reduction of $25,000 from our current allocation. One of the big changes in our budget, you'll see throughout the departmental budget, is the FICA and any fringe benefit that follows. Salaries will be budgeted within the departmental budgets. They will follow the salaries. This is due to the fact that we're going to a new payroll system as of January 1st, and it is programmed that the benefits will follow the salaries of the employees, rather than be charged to one line item, which they are now. This does incorporate the only union that has been settled, which is the Police Supervisors Union. They got a 2% increase plus a one-time 5% increase. They have agreed to eliminate the captain's positions. Those positions will be eliminated from the budget as those people retire or leave the system. I would guess most of them would retire since they have about 30 years, so. The budget does include fire department overtime of $2.2 million. That's consistent with what we anticipate will be this year's overtime. It includes $265,000 for settlements and $1.4 million for professional services, and that number has been reduced to cover the cost of a new assistant corporate counsel, as I mentioned earlier. Some of the capital projects in there are listed here. We have scales for overweight truck enforcement that was budgeted this year, but we haven't purchased them yet. $200,000, which is a great need for our cameras at the police building. As I mentioned, finishing the Union Station parking lot. $22,000 in the signage that was budgeted this year but hasn't been completed yet. $2.3 million for the 2019 roadway program. If you recall, we amended this year's budget for $2.5 million. Those projects have just been started and we'll be completing them in 2020. We need to complete the fencing at the stadium. As mentioned, $6.5 million for library improvements, $4 million for vehicles, the purchase and payment, first payment for an ambulance. We borrowed $200,000. The city had to put in $100,000, and the $23,000 is for the first payment on that debt. The sirens were approved as this budget, as amended the 2019 budget. Those aren't complete yet. $2.4 million for the IDOT local share of the Cullinan project that was two pieces, one for 1.7 million and the rest for the purchase of the Slavic property. 8 million for the new bus station, but 7.9 million of that is funded by PACE. We were committed to put in 160,000 plus 60,000 for utilities hookup. 481,000 for computer systems. That's for the completion of our payroll project and our Tyler Munis upgrade. Almost $1 million for the Chicago Street reopening. Again, that was budgeted this year, and we just did a little bit of work. It should be complete, well, it will be completed next year. I'm looking at the Public Works Director, so.
No pressure, huh?
No pressure on him.
72,000 for the bridge and 71,000 for the Meadow roadway improvement. Both of those were budgeted this year and haven't been completed yet, so it would have to be completed in 2020.
Mayor?
Yes.
Question, Jim. Historically, traditionally, at least in the last 8 years I've been here, we don't seem to get a final analysis of the previous year's final numbers until June at the earliest, sometimes July. I think one year we did it in July. And we're referring to certain projects that were budgeted last year for, right? And so if we didn't spend that money and if we did work the budget properly and would have been a balanced budget, that means that some of that money that wasn't spent last year's budget is going to be dumped into the, possibly, and I won't know until July, will be dumped into the reserve, which means we can use that money. It doesn't belong solely in the reserve since it wasn't spent last year. If it makes its way to the reserve, if that's where we end up, that needs to be put towards the conclusion of the project.
The money for these projects were transferred to the Capital Projects Fund. We look at it each year. If there's any money left over, then we don't request it for new capital projects in the new year. So, for example, it could be transferred back to the general fund. You're correct.
Okay.
A few of the items that we have added in the last year is the old Union Station, 186,000, 288,000 for the Gateway Center, and 300,000 for the prison. The prison money is basically a match to our state grants. We are going to start the visitor center here pretty soon, and those items were not in prior budgets. Now comes the hard part, the recommendations for revenue enhancements. We recommended cannabis tax at 250,000. We're not really sure about that number. Again, if we got more, that would go back into reserves. I know some of the numbers that were thrown around were as much as $1 million, and we put in 250,000. Again, it may come in higher. It's still up in the air right now until the sales start and we start collecting. Then we'll have a harder number. The property tax, we already talked about 4.9%. There's a recommendation to increase the hotel tax from 7 to 10%. That's 1.2 million.
Real quick question, Mayor.
Yes.
Did we get a list of surrounding communities where they're at with their hotel motel tax?
I didn't.
Yes, we did. Mr. Mahalik has that.
Could you make sure the council sees that?
You'd like us to send it out?
Yes.
Okay. We'll send that out and,
Because it's all about competition, Mayor,
Yes.
for surrounding communities.
Right.
the contractor registration would be a new fee, $200 for new contractor, $150 for a renewal, that would be $585,000. The ambulance fees, we've already passed getting from the federal people more from Medicare. We're anticipating $250,000. We're hoping it'll be more once that gets instituted. And our billing system, Andreas Medical, recommends that we start billing for other services, and that would be for like extrications, a car fire, for example. We could get money out of the auto insurance. Again, I will remind you about all of our ambulance fees. We collect from insurance companies, and we collect from people who don't live in Joliet. If there is a fee that goes to a person in the city of Joliet and it's not paid by the insurance, we waive it. So that would be no increases to the person who's using the service. We're recommending a gasoline tax from 1 to 4 cents per gallon. That would raise about 1.8 million. And we would recommend using that money, A, to pay back a bond issue for buying vehicles, and B, to establish a vehicle replacement fund, which we don't have at the current time.
Mayor, quick question on
Yes.
the motor fuel tax. Could you please, and I think it should be done publicly, break down the total tax we have in gasoline with home rule, retail, occupational? We don't charge just 1 cent per gallon. So we need that total breakdown. And then I was told, and it may have been just an off-the-cuff estimate, that for every cent that we put on top according to current volume, it would be $230,000 to $280,000 in new revenue. Unless you folks are predicting a huge increase in volume bought, it seems like 3 additional cents per tax would be closer to about 700,000 or 800,000, and not 1.8 million.
Well, I guess my question is, you say 1 to 4 cents, and then you total it 1.8. Which one is it? Is it 1 cent, 2 cent, 3 cent, or 4 cent?
It's
That gets you
adding,
1.8 million.
it's adding 3 cents to the total. And to answer your question, Councilman Hug, right now we have 1%, or 1 cent per gallon, excuse me. We raise about $680,000 a year per one.
And what are how do the other taxes break down? The retail, the occupational, there's a list of taxes.
It's a pretty complicated, it goes everything from RTA to county to state to local.
Well,
We
I
can
know,
get
I
you
know that 49% of the total tax, right now, the average person in Will County, or maybe I don't know what other counties do, pays about 77 cents in tax on a $3 purchase in gas. So if the gas were currently $3 a gallon right now, it would be 77 cents in taxes. 51% is distributed back to the different municipalities and taken by the state. And then the state takes the other 49%. And what's interesting is they give that, they break that, they divide that tax back up to municipalities. And a lot of people, and I don't have it in front of me, I think it was between 8 and 10 cents. A lot of people don't realize of that 49% the state tax, collects when you go to the gas station, the new Thorntons you're going to go to, 8 to 10 cents of that 49% goes back to Cook County. People need to know that. We wouldn't be even looking at an increase if we didn't have to give it back. Yes, it's I believe it's called an EPA tax.
Okay. And
Because-
there's RTA also, which
Right,
kind of
no,
goes to
EPA
the
because of the higher concentration of vehicles. But I did that breakdown last spring, and like I said, I believe it came out to 8 cents of the 34 cents, 8 cents or 6, or maybe it was 6. I'll have to get the numbers again. But a portion of it goes back to Cook County when you buy it on Essington Road. Now, there's nothing you guys or we can do about that.
We'll
That's
get
a
you, we'll
state
get
issue.
you that list.
Sure.
No,
We will add that list. We did that analysis recently when we were discussing raising the gas tax about 4 or 5 months ago. So we can present that to council also.
and to that point, I'm a little stuck on this. That was presented to the Finance Committee, correct, Mike?
It was just discussed, it wasn't formally discussed,
Right.
no.
So none of this has gone through committee. It's being put on a budget and thrown in front of the council. These are policy decisions that no one up here has agreed to. And yet, right, we could vote the budget down, but that's, I don't think we're operating the right way. I think decisions like this need to be vetted. It was introduced to committee, I presume for a reason. It wasn't just an exercise. You were thrown in a committee to see what kind of response you were gonna get. I assume you didn't get the positive response, so now you've ignored the committee process and put it all on a budget.
Well, no, Mayor. We've gone through committee with several capital issues and indicating that we would bring back a budget to look at ways of funding it. An open meeting is a way for it to be discussed. So to somehow misconstrue that this, there's no opportunity for discussion, that's clearly what this is for. This is, a budget workshop. We set aside 2 meetings specifically to talk about the budget. So if the council has some changes, some suggestions, some alternatives, that's what these meetings are for.
A recommendation from our Community Development Department was to have our foreclosed properties registered. That would be a new registration fee estimated at about $200,000. It's recommended to increase the building permit fee from $6.25 per 1,000 to $10 per 1,000 of as-built value. That would raise $722,000. Increase other miscellaneous fees in the Community Development Department would raise $162,000. And increase the garbage collection fee 2.4% to match the increase in our contract expenditures that went into effect, that will go into effect in 2020 for our contract. Some of the items that are not included in this budget is Chicago Street Plaza and improvements north of Jefferson. It is anticipated that once we get Chicago Street opened, we could start talking about the plaza that was recommended and the improvements from Jefferson to Cass Street.
And let me stop Jim there. There's an interesting timing issue that would allow the council, or provide a means for the council to actually fund, if not all the Chicago Street improvements north of Jefferson, most of them, along with the plaza, without increasing the tax rate. We presently are on the last 2 years of a bond issue, and the city currently pays about, $1.6 million a year in debt service. We had our financial advisor look at that to say, okay, if the council were to go out for a bond issue, keeping it at that $1.6 million in annual debt service, how much of a bond issue could the city actually bring in? And it came mysteriously close to the dollar amount required for the plaza and for Chicago Street, about $20.5 million. So in effect, later in the calendar year, we'll bring something forward for the council to consider to see if you would like to start that process. Obviously, when you're talking about $20 million in bonds, that's a pretty big hit. But due to the fact that this debt service is about to end, it allows the council to kind of move forward without imposing a huge increase within the taxpayer. So that's something I wanted Jim to put it on here, because there's really no way to budget for that without an awful lot of discussion, design, et cetera. But it's something that would allow you to really accomplish a goal that folks have been talking about for a good 4 or 5 years.
Mayor, if I may,
Yes.
before we get down any further, I see the body cameras are on here, and that did come to public safety, but we didn't have it on the agenda the last time we met. And Deputy Chief Bates is working on that, and finally came that they were going to budget for that, and that will require a body cam for every police officer. So we just have to vote on it. But they put that in their budget, and we didn't. It wasn't on the agenda because it was supposed to go on the agenda for the next Tuesday.
And I think that's the proper way to handle this.
But I just want, before we went there, we did discuss it, and we just didn't vote on it because it wasn't on that agenda, because he came back.
Okay.
He'd been researching it for several months. So
Thank you.
just so you know, that did come to us. We'll vote on it on the 5th, 4th. That Tuesday.
There's no comprehensive plan in this budget for our building improvements. Increases for employees other than the supervisors unions is not included in here. As you know, those are in negotiations right now. The new bus station, the building of the new bus station is in here. Most of it is going to be funded by PACE, but the city is expected to operate that once it is built. If it is complete in 2020, we're going to have to amend the budget, but I believe the operations won't start until 2021. That would be next year's budget. As Councilwoman just pointed out, the body cameras were requested. They're not included in this budget. The estimated first-year cost was about $632,000. And this budget does not address our continued growing retirees' health care unfunded liability, which as of December 31st, 2018, has grown to $414 million. We are paying for retirees' health care as you go. It is a liability that is unfunded at this point. In this budget, we're recommending bonding for three separate items. One would be the library improvements. One would be 4 million for vehicles. The recommendation is to fund that through increase in the gas tax, and $3 million for the parking system, which would be paid from parking revenue fees. This graph shows how our taxes are broken down. It's pretty diverse. Our largest is sales taxes. Let's hope more people buy in the city of Joliet, so we take in more. And the one thing that we hope we get a lot more of is the internet tax. The Wayfair decision allowed us to collect internet tax, so every person who purchases something and it's delivered to the city of Joliet, the tax would be levied by the provider and paid to the state and distributed to us. Most governments are thinking that'll be 10%. It is slowly creeping up, but we haven't experienced the 10% yet, but it's not in full force yet either. 20% of our revenue comes from property taxes, and the rest boil down to about 10% per item. Again, this just shows the amounts which is budgeted. We are recommending 192.4 million in this budget. Our expenditures, this is divided up by department. Our police department is about 60 million, our fire department, 42 million. Our human resources department is about 30 million, but you have to remember our health care is taken out of our human resources budget. So that's about 23 to 24 million. And the rest of the departments as they go. I will say the Department of Finance, it also includes our payment for our garbage collection. This shows what type of expenditure we're having. It's clear to see we spend our money on people. 45% of our budget is for payroll, 33% is for the benefits, 78% of our budget is people. Again, this graphically shows the areas we're spending money on. Again, payroll and benefits, about $140 million out of a $190 million budget. This budget is very much like our past two-year budgets. Every department has a narrative, a history. We have charts, we have graphs, we have goals, we have accomplishments from the prior year. All these things were added 4 years ago, so we'd be eligible for the GFOA's Distinguished Budget Presentation Award. And I'm happy to say that we got it for our 2019 budget. That's our third straight year that we received this award. We're recommending a small decrease, about 300,000 in fund balance, but that will bring us right to the edge of our goal of having a 20% fund balance to support anything that should happen that's unbudgeted. I will go over departments, human resources. Again, we budget $1.1 million in the human resources department. That is for payouts for when people retire. There's a small decrease in hospitalization, about 130,000, and that's from last year's budget. I know when the human resources director presented it, it was a lot more. That was comparing it to this year's estimated year end. So fortunately, we are holding pretty steady on our health care, and that's very unusual. But the thing pointed out is, if you remember, we have a $414 million retirees' health care budget. 40% of our health care goes to funding retirees' health care. There's $364,000 in their budget, and that is for when a person opts out of their health insurance, it's paid out of the Human Resources Department. So for example, if a family member opts out of our health insurance, they get $5,200 a year. There's an increase in our property and liability insurance. We are including all of our buildings, and that also increases for cybersecurity, which most of you know, we need more. I think if you look at some of the breaches across the country, it's costing millions, billions of dollars for cybersecurity and the breaches. And the one new item is $125,000. We would like to start a protective clothing policy where people are, depending on their position, required to wear protective clothing, which would include, for example, steel-closed shoes, long-sleeve shirts, the proper outerwear. We have never had a policy, and we are requesting $125,000 to start providing protective clothing for everybody and make it mandatory.
Jim, are you saying that we should buy the steel-toe boots for everybody?
Depending on the position, yes. Human Resources Director is right now putting that together, which workers should wear which protective clothing. Clearly, we should protect our workers, and if the job requires that, then we would provide them with steel-toe shoes is the best example, so.
I have a question. Do we still budget for, some of the employees, don't they get a budget for clothing for, in-house, like clerical and things like that?
I have to defer to the Human Resources Director.
You said no? There was a clothing allowance before.
There are some clothing allowances in some of the CBAs that we have,
But
mostly
that's
for
not,
uniform.
it's not dictated what they have to wear, correct?
Correct.
Maybe we should look into that.
Well,
No, what?
no,
Okay.
yeah, I think, again, that, probably a good idea, probably should be vetted by a committee.
Jim, does this include safety glasses or no?
Yeah, no one knows.
That should come public safety then.
Right, all should.
Yeah, it's part of the overall risk management. You recall we had an accident, was it 2 years ago, involving a member of our utility department, and we had some OSHA inspections, and basically the need for these type of protective policies became clear. The program is really starting up in the utilities department, and obviously, since much of the work that's done by utility work would also be done by a public works director, a public works employee, or perhaps a building worker, it's the same type of risks and hazards.
What is the projected opening date for the Loves truck stop?
What is the what? I'm sorry?
Projected opening date?
Do you know?
Opening date for what?
Loves.
For Loves? I don't have that information.
It definitely won't open next year, or it may open some point next year.
They've had some delays with regard to utilities. Allison, do you know where the utilities stand in terms of design?
I'd have to defer to Jim Trisno. I think most of the delays were associated with obtaining the IDOT permits necessary.
The last I've heard is that they want to get started in the spring or late winter, early spring. They got to run sewer and water from Cherry Hill Road and New Lenox, Cherry Hill Road, New Lenox Road, west over to their truck stop. And I know we just gave them I think the final set of comments on their periphery streets, Oakview and New Lenox Road. I just saw a letter go out today from our group. They're getting pretty close. But I think their intent was to try to build it next year, maybe very end of the year, open it up, maybe this time next year.
Okay. That's it for now.
The Community Development Department, as we mentioned earlier, the Rialto Theater, Museum, the Chamber of Commerce, Will County, CED, the Title 20 program, the courthouse, the PACE route are all consistent with prior years, except for the Rialto requested $25,000 less than the prior year. Again, we've rebudgeted the citywide comprehensive plan, $250,000 for next year.
Jim, the money set aside for the matching, the 300, what was it, and 60,000 for the prison is not part of the community development?
Prison is in the public works budget.
Okay.
Tax rebates are anticipated $824,000, that's consistent. And the three positions, they're new positions except for upgrading one part-time to a full-time. These positions are funded by requests for increases in fees.
Thank you.
The city manager's budget is $15,000 for Channel 6 for their equipment, and a transition from the economic development director to the deputy city manager on a contracted basis, savings of about $45,000. In the legal, contractual in budget is 1.6 million, consistent with this year, except for a reduction to cover the cost of a new assistant corporate counsel. Legal claims are consistent at 265,000. About 2 years ago, legal claims were over $3 million. Adjudication, we started that this year. There's 77,000 in for the court services coordinator, and we budget for a hearing officer. That adjudication is currently raising over $1 million a year.
Jim, you're right when you pointed out about the legal claims, because I've actually talked about this, I think in the last two State of the City speeches I've given. Steve, I don't know if you heard it, but we were paying out about $3 million in legal claims.
That was, in the last 10 years that I looked at, that was our peak.
Right.
Most years it was in between 1 and 2 million.
And now we're paying out about $250,000, $265,000. So it's been a significant decrease. Moreover, the revenues are off the charts compared to where they were before because of the local prosecutions that we've initiated.
Yes, adjudication.
So I don't know who took, again, because I wasn't consulted, but Steve, have you taken this into account? Because you're kind of going backwards from where we've made a lot of progress there, and it seems like you want to undo it now. You want to bring in more in-house counsel at the risk of seeing our legal claims go sky high like they were before.
Our corporation counsel made a recommendation. He saw the need perhaps to lessen some dependence on one of our firms that perhaps had some higher paid talent, when the thought was we could actually do that in a cheaper manner on a local basis.
Okay. And then can you, I know you don't have them right now, but what's the revenue going to be this year from the legal department, from those local prosecutions? Because that's all new money. It didn't exist 4 years ago.
$1.2 million are estimated for this year.
So we need to track that moving forward. Again, those are new dollars that the city wasn't collecting before. So if we see a decrease with this, if this passes, then we need to address that.
Mayor?
Yes.
Steve, or Jim, did you have an estimate on what you think we're going to save in outside services by hiring an assistant corporation counsel for $70,000?
Repeat that again?
What is your estimated savings for outside services by bringing a assistant corporate counsel on for
I can
$70,000?
probably answer that question. This is mostly for the prosecutions done in courtroom 121. So we looked at it, and it's about 400 or so hours over the course of a year. which is about 70,000, that's about the salary, and then there would be an additional 1,200 or 1,400 additional hours that in-house person could do on other legal matters.
Now, wouldn't the total cost of that new position be well in excess of 70,000?
Oh, it will be. It'll be 70 plus
100,
benefits, 120-ish.
So we'd be spending 120 and saving 75?
I know, we're going to be saving more than that. I can sit down with you and run the numbers. What we did is we went through the billing statements.
Okay.
The total cost of that position would be $115,000. IT department, all the telephone is now being charged to the IT department, $384,000, and that is with the Vonage system. That is about $100,000 less than what we paid in the past. The fire department, the increase in pensions, as mentioned earlier, a little over $1 million, and overtime is budgeted. What we're estimating this year's end would be about $2.2 million. In the finance department, that's my budget. We budget $1 million to pay to the IMRF. Remember earlier, we were talking about payouts when people leave. Those payouts increase their pension. It's called pension spiking. In the old days, the IMRF would let us spread that, and over time, now we have to pay the extra liability up front. We budget $1 million for that, and we've been holding at about $1 million. Last year, it was quite a bit more because of so many retirees last year. Again, $410,000 we pay for our computer system. That comes out of my budget. And that's ongoing, consistent, and does include the cost of our payroll system. And the ballpark is in the finance department budget. We're looking at $150,000 in repairs and about a $300,000 total expenditure on the ballpark.
Mayor?
Yes.
Jim, on the ballpark, as he estimated to be about $301,000 in expenditures. And what's the estimate for revenues?
I believe the check I received for naming rights was around $70,000 this year. That's the only revenue we get from them.
Okay, thank you.
Police department, again, increase in pensions, 1.3 million. Overtime budget is at 2.7 million, consistent with this year. In the public department, Public Works Department, most of these expenditures are ongoing. $400,000 for tree removal, $250,000 for a project manager at the Hobart Road project, $130,000 for the floodplain consultant, $300,000 in sidewalk improvements. And the Public Works budget, as we mentioned earlier, has the Gateway Center, the Union Station, and the prison in their budget. That's the general fund. With that, I'll move on to the water and sewer fund. $58 million in revenues. Expenditures, about $57 million. So we're looking at increase in the fund balance or net position in this fund. There is $12 million in depreciation, and that's important to point out that depreciation is $12 million. That means our system has depreciated $12 million, but we're adding $17.5 million. So we're finally starting to get ahead of the game and replace our system with current revenues rather than borrowing. Keep service levels, provides for maintenance costs. There's the $17.5 million for capital. A combined 6.2 water and sewer rate increase was instituted November 1st of this year. 53 million of infrastructure improvements through IEPA loans. The two transfers that are recommended is a 550,000 transfer to the Water Replacement Reserve Fund. That's the Rethink Water. And it's estimated that we will have 1.2 million in that fund. It also is recommended 500,000 to start accumulating funds to replace the building for the Water and Sewer Center. And it provides funding for an additional utility service worker and a collection system superintendent. This shows where our revenue's coming from, and quite frankly, 93% are fees. Fines and fees is 2%, and other is interest in miscellaneous revenues. This shows where our money's going. Of course, 40% of it's going towards the field operations. But you can see each debt service is up to 7.7 million. That will continue to grow as we institute more IEPA loans. And unlike the general fund, payroll and benefits are about 30% of this budget. Parking fund, 4.9 million is an increase of 3 million. But we're recommending bonding $3 million for infrastructure improvements. And expenditures are about the same. As I said, that 5.04 is going to go down to about 4.8 million due to the taxes for parking being rescinded by the state for municipalities. And again, the 122,000 has been repealed. So we'll add about 50,000 if the budget comes out to be actual. And payment of bond principal and interest is included, about 200,000. And in this fund, this is kind of skewed this year because of the $3 million of bond proceeds. And that shows the 3 million in infrastructure improvements. And with that, that's my presentation for our operating funds and the manager's recommended budget. Happy to answer any questions, or if you send them to the city manager, we can get back with you and give you additional documentation.
Questions?
I just have a comment. Steve, who put this together, the original?
When you say put it together, what do you mean?
The introduction of boards and commissions and council people. We need to update those lists, because Sherry Reardon is not even there. And some of the boards and commissions people have changed, so.
Absolutely. We did do this as a point in time, and thank you. We never included this before, but as I go through the year and people ask questions, I like to include them in the budget so we have them right as a reference
No, and
point.
that's good, but I'm just
I
saying, if
agree
it
with
goes
you.
out.
We will update them and by the final one, have them up to date as of the end of this year.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Jim, one quick question. I think one of our bond agencies is Bernardi and Associates. We work with them, correct?
We already,
Is that what-
Spear.
we work with Spear
we use Spear.
Financial and,
Still getting this mail, right?
The
forget the
attorney,
name of our-
Ice Miller.
Yeah, Ice Miller is our bond consultant on one. We use Chapman for our bond attorney on the other, but that is our financial advisor.
It's going to fluctuate depending on what percentage of return the bond is issued at. I think everybody understands that. What I would like for our next budget meeting is an estimate. If we assume there's $24 million in revenue over 20 years from the city, divide 24 million by 20, right? Of that 24 million with, the bond service, how much, what's the amount of revenue we can bond? Is it 15 million? Is it 14 million? Do you know what I'm saying? How much will be interest of that 24 million that we pay over 20 years, and how much will be the bond principal that we use for capital? Can you find that out? Get an estimate? I guess bonds can go anywhere from 2.5%, 3.5% on it, and, depending on how
It
good.
depends on the day that you
Right.
sell your bonds. As the city manager pointed out, we've had preliminary talks with them. They do it for free, so until they make their money when we do float a bond. We have about 1.6 million in debt service right now. That's going to fall off, and they estimate about 20.5 million could be borrowed at 1.6 million per year. But we will break that down for you by principal.
Right, I just want to know, if we pay 24 million over 20 years on a bond, what is the principal of that bond?
Okay. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you.
One thing that Jim and I talked about as we were going through this budget and kind of identifying some of the, single-year challenges along with some of the challenges that we see in the future. One thing I'm going to ask the finance department to do in 2020 is to do a 5-year budget. Not necessarily something that, is then adopted by council as a 5-year working budget, but something that gives you a little more context in terms of some of the projections, the upward trajectory of some revenues and expenses and the downward trajectory of others. One of the things that we've been watching, and again, it's all guesswork and it's all trends, is, I think our ability to really look at sustainability with the methods that we've used and, relying on growth and sales tax, some of those dynamics are changing. Doesn't mean they're going to go away, but it's becoming a little bit more of a challenge to balance the budget. I mean, one thing we've seen is that long, slow decline of gaming revenues, which at one point in time were the heart and soul of our revenues here. So I think by doing a 5-year projection, not only will it look at the revenues, but it'll look at things like the pension requirements, the health insurance, just the general salaries and collective bargaining agreements. I think it'll be pretty useful, 6 months in advance of the budget to get that sense of the trend so you could see exactly where those lines are heading. This isn't uncommon in other communities. I was always a little surprised Joliet wasn't doing it, but it did get started about a year ago. It just never got finished. So that'll be another level of complexity we'll throw at you, but hopefully it'll be something that'll be a nice guide so that decisions, when it comes down to crunch time in December, are a little bit easier to fathom and understand.
Well, and Mayor, another tool I'd like, as we consider this too, going back to 2014, like I said, I remember one year really stuck out in my mind. I can't remember if it was 14, 15, 16, where we had a projected deficit at this point in the budget process of $7.5 million, and then by July of, a year and a half later. But when we went through that budget process, we wound up with even though we didn't raise any taxes, we wound up with a $3.5 million surplus. So we tend to have some very conservative approaches to what's presented at this point. And something like that, I'm not going to be comfortable with that number until I hit July and they tell me what we did last year. They may say, oh, you had a $7 million surplus. So if you can give us an analysis of what was presented over the last 4 years at this stage for each year, and what, if it was a deficit or if it was, if it was a balanced budget, and what we had as surplus.
Yeah, we can go back.
Okay.
You hear that, Jim? Okay. Okay. Any other questions anyone has on budget? Okay, we will get you some of the documents that you've asked for, and certainly commentary between now and our next meeting would certainly be in order. If there's anything we did not address that you felt should have been here, or something that you just didn't think of until after, by all means, let us know.
Just one question. The mayor had pointed out, and I think Councilwoman Coleman pointed out maybe another one. Oh, the body cams.
Body cams.
Are you gonna be sending those things that didn't go before committee before tonight to committee now?
Well, I don't know if, I'm trying to think of, there's the IT issue and the public safety, and I don't remember, wasn't there some talk that prior to body cams, there had to be in-car cameras, which are budgeted?
Okay, to be clear, there's only a small portion of our cars today that have in-car. And when we talked about this in CTIS, the thought was to make sure we've got the in-car cameras complete for the entire fleet. That is in the budget. That's the fleet is in there. And then the idea was that once we got that in and established, and then we were going to then follow it with body cam in the following year. And we didn't even know 100% that what the appetite was going to be for the spend. Chance. We put the number out there, but it's not in this preliminary budget. But it's up to you guys if you want to get it in there.
Thank you, but I didn't mean to be that specific about one item.
Sorry.
No, thank you for the information. There's never too much information, trust me. Mayor, wasn't there 2 or 3 items that you brought up that you felt hadn't gone through the?
Yeah.
Are they going to go through the committee now?
Why? If we vote it up, it's done, like a gas tax increase. I
Right.
mean, which I'll say right now, I'm not gonna support, so.
All right, can we just back up here?
Yeah.
So David and Chief Rochner have helped me here explain that Mr. Beta, or DC Betas went out and checked it all out, and he got the figures and the monies, because we had some concerns about how long you have to keep the video. Now, this is the first time I'm hearing you have to have the cameras in the car as well before we do that. That never came up at committee, did it? Chief? Because last meeting, we discussed it under, old business.
Yeah, that was discussed the previous couple meetings, saying to do the body cams, they're tied in with the in-car cameras, and because we had different systems, we had to bring it all down to one system.
Right, and the in-car cameras, they're already in the budget, because I saw it.
Right, so you'd have to do that part first before you do the body cams, because they're tied together. So it's how the process goes with Axon, the company that does it. So it's not a no right now. It's better to budget for the cars. It's gonna take a long time to get all the cars set up, I think is
Well, right, but we are planning for it, that was my whole point.
Yeah.
And with the cars, cameras in the cars, we'll start with that, that's in the budget, which I saw. And then we already wanted to plan, like you said, for the body cams, because that was a direct result from public meetings that we had, that they were concerned that the police officers didn't have body cams.
Right, I think the important part is it's not gonna happen as quick as a lot of people would want it to because of the in-car first process. So you're talking a lot of months down the line. So our thought is, and Dave can speak maybe more on how long, you can get those numbers from Axon to see how long it'll take to get all the cars going. So it might be better just to put it in next year's budget and use money for other things before then, for the bodies themselves, what we're saying.
All right, so we'll discuss that at the next public safety then.
Well,
Okay.
and again, that's the proper form. I don't want to be stuck on this. But there is policy decisions need to be made. And it belongs at your committee level with the police chief and the deputy chiefs there. You don't just put it on the budget and try to jam it past everyone. That's not the right way to do it.
Well, do keep in
Whatever
mind.
your intention was, Steve, Councilwoman Quillen and Chief Roaster had the right exchange. Those decisions need to be made at that level.
We did discuss the in-car cameras that we don't, in the IT committee meeting, that we don't have those currently in all of the vehicles, and that seems very necessary.
I'm not talking about a specific item, but there's a process that should be followed. Your committee should vote it up, it should come to the council then should then vote on whether or not we want to spend this money. To put it in the budget, you're basically putting the cart before the horse.
And keep in mind, Mayor, in terms of the budget process, there are any number of items, both department-driven as well as committee-driven, that get put on the table. There's X number of dollars of revenue. So you could have any number of committees that think that their issue is the most important thing in the world, but until it comes before the entire legislative body, that's the point at where priorities have to be made in terms of there's X number of dollars to go around, and there are X number of things that can be purchased. So
The public isn't going to see it that way. When you start talking about tax increases, if we approve a budget that includes that in there, everyone's going to think their taxes went up. Doesn't matter what we do at a later date, it's gonna be presented the way the council's raising taxes. So that's why, again, it started at the finance committee, it never made it out of finance committee, but that's where that discussion belongs, and then come to the council and be vetted by the council.
You know, people, you know, we can use the library as an example, and $8 a year on the average, no, that won't kill anybody. But people aren't stupid. It's 8 times 100. Everybody's penny, dime, and nickeling them here in Illinois. Now, what's very sad, and we've got to find a way to dig out of the hole that was created, is for 4 years, from 2015 to 2019, we brought in almost $1.5 billion in new construction, which allowed us not to raise taxes and fees, which, you know, helped us keep abreast of the increases to the budget. And it's all been but dead since May or June. Steve, when you first were approached, sitting in that chair, to be the interim city manager, your exact words to an effect were, you know, I think that it won't be a problem for the first 30 days, but once we hit 45 days and beyond, it's going to hurt economic development. Well, it's killed it. You're no longer doing the economic development as you once did full-time, and using your own words, we're well beyond that 45 days. As a council, we've got to dig out of that hole now. We wouldn't be considering, and I won't consider these tax increases, you know, punishing the citizens with extra taxes for the mistakes that were made up here.
So Mayor, I was just going to suggest.
Yes.
When we have an item like that, like the cameras and IT's involved and finance, maybe we should like have a combined meeting when we have something like that, because it involves all 3 committees.
Sure.
And everybody's there at once and we all know what everybody's doing. So Steve, when that happens, call us up and tell, combined meeting.
Kind of like this one.
Well, that way you have this committee meeting and that committee meeting, and then we can just talk about all the.
But that's the point I was trying to make, that, you know, literally you have an entire council here, and this is the most important decision you make. You know, it's news to me that somehow major budget issues should be done at a committee level. I mean, we took some of the capital things, which of course, you know, we had 4 different things we presented to various committees over time, and we said we would come back with some funding. So in effect, this is that forum.
Well, but had we all met together and talked about it, then it would have been here. Well, anyway, it would have been vetted out. Anyway, forget it, that's my idea. I think we should do that for future.
Okay.
Next would be public comments. Anyone that would like to speak under public comments? None? Is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Motion seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting adjourned.